you remember, you were a young man at the time. Can you remember any particular moments when you realised how the tide was turning?
Yeah, there are a couple of episodes. Because Idi Amin had taken over, the army was pretty lawless. So it was not uncommon to, at night hear people being harassed by the army, knocking down their doors, going in, ransacking it. And then, on one particular occasion, I saw a mob just turn on a guy and just stone him to death. People were starting to disappear. So you really started to get nervy. Unfortunately, we didn't have many options because we're taking up Uganda citizenship, so that you just couldn't easily get accepted in another part of the world. So it was uneasy, and witnessing that, you had to be very careful not to go out, not to be on the streets at night or anything of that nature, lock up.
Where you were living, how safe did you feel at the time?
It's a funny thing. You sort of get used to that kind of behavior, which is wrong, and it's a terrible thing to have to say. But you sort of get used to the fact that, yeah, somebody's going to get pickpocketed or somebody's going to get molested in the streets and all. And then you sort of accept that as the semi-norm.
What happened in the end that forced you to leave?
Yeah, so it was one morning, Idi Amin got up on the news, and we suddenly heard that he had addressed his troops and said that God spoke to me, and all the Indians have to leave. They have to leave in 3 months' time. And we thought, oh my gosh. We, of course, didn't think it would apply to us because we're taking Uganda citizenship. So that really upset the apple cart. Going back a little bit before that, we thought things were a bit uneasy when all of the Ugandan citizens had to take out identity cards. So that was an unusual thing, that suddenly you're singled out, you have an identity card. And also before that, he expelled all the Jews. You sort of sit back and put things in line. You start to think, yeah, things were starting to get bad. So that's when we suddenly realized we have to leave the country. We thought it won't apply to us because we were Ugandan citizens, and people were leaving the country. People were going to different embassies trying to get safe passage. My dad just never bothered. Lots of friends were doing that because they didn't have Uganda citizenship, and so they were having to leave. Yeah.
And can you tell us how it affected you in terms of having to carry an identity card because of your ethnicity?
You felt uncomfortable that, why are you being singled out? That you have to have an identity card, you have to prove who you are, even though you're a citizen of the country. Why should you have to do that? But then, when you got a dictator and an army, there was no questioning. The press never questioned him.
When Idi Amin said you have to leave the country, can you tell us a bit about that particular moment in history?
Yeah, I vividly remember that because we got up that morning and my cousins were visiting us from India. And as soon as he said that, my mom said to them, you got to leave Uganda. You can't stay here because they're on their honeymoon. And we said, you have to leave. And it did impact us that we were going to lose a lot of our friends. And that is the first thing that happened. When Idi Amin said you had to leave, you couldn't take any money. So these people were desperate. They had huge assets, properties and all. So you had cases where people were literally taking all their life savings in suitcases and hoping to cross the border.
So firstly, do you remember that exact moment when you heard that you had to leave?
Oh, yes. It was in the morning and I got up and we heard it on the radio. And yes, I do remember that.
Can you describe how you felt at that moment?
I thought that's a strange thing to do, to actually expel people. It just didn't register with me that, how can you be doing this, The Indian community pretty much ran the commerce and the business there. There was hardly a shop in the main part of Kampala that was not run by a business. There was hardly a manufacturing company that was not run by an Indian. They ran everything.
So what did your family do once they heard this news?
My dad was a bit nervous, so was my mum. They never discussed it with me, but I think they were a bit nervous. But they thought that we'd ride it out because we were citizens. My dad had his job, my mum had her job. The schools were functioning, the businesses were still going. And suppose indirectly, my dad thought, oh, here's an opportunity, they'll create some more vacancies for me in the organization and all. So, yeah, there was no case of, oh, we have to leave tomorrow or anything of the sort. We just continued.
So you tried to just continue with life
As long as
normal?
best you could, yeah.
And when did that change?
It probably changed a month before, because he gave us a 3-month deadline. So you had to leave, I think that must have been about the end of September. So about a month into that, we started to realize that things were really, really bad. You realize that. But then we started to see what he was doing to the people and harassing the people and all. And that's when my dad said it's not safe. And by that stage, more countries were starting to take people, Canada and all. And so my dad said, okay, we will need to leave this country. We can't stay here. So that's what triggered it all. It was just a couple of weeks before the deadline.
And you said before you witnessed people being killed on the streets. Were they people from
No,
Indian background?
no, they were indigenous people. The indigenous people turn on their own people. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had opportunities to potentially go to other countries.
Yep.
What other countries did you consider?
My parents considered Canada, but then they found that the requirements were quite strict. They were not accepting. My dad had no formal qualification. My mom was a qualified teacher. Initially, Australia also was not accepting people because they still were very restrictive in who they were going to allow in. And then, so as the deadline was approaching, having made the decision to leave, the only other option was for us to go to the UK. A week or two before that, just word came out that the Australian embassy was being a bit more lenient in who it was selecting. And so my dad applied and we were selected. And I think we virtually left on the last day of the deadline.
And you mentioned previously that the church was quite involved in it.
Yes, the Uniting Church, we found out subsequently when we came here, the Uniting Church had lobbied an awful lot with the government, as well as some of the initial migrants who got onto the media, and that sort of opened up the discussion. But the Uniting Church was very instrumental in bringing us forward and arranging accommodation for us. We had accommodation at the hostel at South Coogee.
It was in the midst of the White Australia policy.
It was just coming to the end of it. I think government had changed. Gough Whitlam had come into power, and that I think changed the directives of the foreign embassies that they need to be bringing people in. But I think seeing a few coming in, and I think the church did an awful lot of lobbying across the country. The state premier started to ease up and say, yes, we will take people. And so, yeah, so we left on the last plane, which is the end of September, early October.
When you came, did you know any other people who had been expelled from Uganda?
Yes, so we did come across them in the hostel because we had lost contact with them. We spent 3 months in India. And then when we came to this hostel, we actually came across some of them who were good friends of ours.
And so after you left the hostel,
the government was good. They sort of said you can stay for about 9 to 12 months there, and it was a good opportunity for my parents to get some money behind them because they first came when we left Uganda. We just had a suitcase each and $10, nothing.
how did the rest of your family adapt to your new life in Australia?
Oh, mom got a job as a teacher, so she liked that. My dad got a job in a construction firm doing pays. My siblings went to school, so they all enjoyed it. They had a good setup, no hassles, and yeah, the country's been very good to me. Yeah, very good.
When did you finally become a citizen and how did that?
Shortly after that, it only took me, I think I had to be in the country for about 3 years. So I applied for that and I got my citizenship.
When did you sort of start to feel that you belong here in Australia?
Right at the start. When I used to go for interviews for jobs and all, they were so welcoming and understanding and all. And I sort of struggled to sort of say, how the hell do you have this external image of being a white Australia and unwelcoming, and then you meet all these people. And I remember one of my cousins applied, and she said, how are the people treating you? I said, it's fantastic. I said, everything you hear outside this country is not true at all.
So you'd heard some negative things about?
Oh yeah, matter of fact, when we applied to come to Uganda, a lot of our friends in Uganda said, oh, why are you going there? They discriminated against you. And I remember telling her, I said, well, we've been discriminated here. Couldn't be any worse. But no, yeah, that was very much the image that of Australia outside was this white Australia policy.
If you look back on your life, what would you say you're most proud of?
Possibly, I'd have to say achieving my studies and achieving a career. I ended up becoming a financial controller for a number of years and a managing director of a company as well. So that's probably what I achieved, what I was proud of, and the fact that this country gave me that opportunity when I had nothing.
And I suppose you were telling me that you integrated very well and people felt welcoming, but were there any obstacles
No,
nevertheless?
never did. You get the odd racist experiences. Matter of fact, we actually had that when we moved here to Camden, because around that time, Pauline Hanson had made a maiden speech in Parliament criticizing Aboriginal people and Asians and everything. And John Howard was the Prime Minister, and I'm waiting and waiting, and he said nothing. And I remember talking over dinner with my wife and saying, I can't believe this. The Prime Minister said nothing about her speech. So she said, well, why don't you write about it? A month later, my wife got a phone call. We were over here, and this woman was blasting her and abusing her and said, how dare you say things like that? We don't want people like you living over here. You can go back and all. And she was just flabbergasted. It was the first night we actually went out. We had our neighbor looking after our kids. So that was a terrible dinner. My wife was so frightened. And for about a good couple of months, we used to have eggs thrown at our house and our cars and all. But that is probably the only time we ever experienced anything like that.
If I could ask you your views on resettlement and the importance globally to countries such as Australia offering places to people as refugees to be resettled in this country. What value do you think that has?
I think there are two elements. One is, I always say that people don't come out as refugees unless they have to. Like, we had no intention of ever leaving Uganda, none whatsoever. Even though it had its ups and downs, we always intended to stay there. So when somebody comes out, they're coming out for a reason. You do need to be welcoming. There are opportunities in this country, and when I sit back and think of all the refugees from Uganda, how they've enhanced this country, there's no reason why other refugees can't do the very same.
So later this year, Australia will have received 1 million refugees since 1947. What are your thoughts?
I didn't realize as many as that. That's an enormous number. When you consider that 1 million would have had, 3 or 4 children, you could probably say at least 20% of the population are refugees or descendants of refugees. Yeah. So I think that is quite a milestone. I was surprised when you said to me 1 million. That's an awful lot.
So I suppose looking back on your experience and that of your family, is there anything else you'd like to say to us about your experience of being displaced?
I sort of value things a lot more. I value opportunities, and I'm a firm believer in paying it forward, paying it back. It's something I try to do in the social things I do now that I'm retired, and it's something I instill in my children as well. That you can't take things for granted. It's a question of what can you do. So yeah, it has had that effect on me. That you should try to help wherever, in whatever means you can do.